Hi, I'm Jill.
And I'm Josh.
Welcome back. This week we're going to show you how we built our new greenhouse.
There was some cutting, a lot of welding, some erecting.
And then we started filling it up.
We're excited to have it going, so stick around and see. You saw our last greenhouse update. You saw us prepare the site and build the wooden foundation. Since then, we've also dug in a water line from an existing hydrant next to the shed. We've been growing a garden at this house now for 10 years. We've always started at least some of our own plants. We've done it in a variety of ways, and eventually we built this little 4x9 greenhouse off the front of the shed. It served us well the last 4 years, but this year, with the added demands of the farmer's market, we are running out of space. So this winter, I started looking at other options. I went back and forth a million times between different kits and DIY options, and I think I finally settled on what might be the hardest way to do it. The place I work had a couple of pallets of these 1.5 by 1.5 by 1/8 wall aluminum square tubes that they were going to scrap. So I volunteered to take some home, and so that's what I'm using. They are just over 30 inches long, so to make a greenhouse out of them requires a lot of assembly. The first step was to come up with a plan, so I started sketching it up in CAD. I wanted to have all the tubes have the same angle cut on the ends to form a semicircle, and I wanted the outside surface to be exactly 10 feet long, so I could use a full sheet of 6 foot by 10 foot polycarbonate for the sides. I made sure I had enough room for a door, and from this CAD sketch, I was able to get my cut list and head to the shop. So to cut these tubes, I got set up on my table saw. I'm using a blade here from Harbor Freight. Pretty good deal. It seemed to work pretty well. I'm just using my miter gauge to set the angle. And then here I'm just cutting the ends off, getting them all started. And then here's kind of my process for the rest. I would use another block to set up as a stop so that all my lengths would be exactly the same. I think here I'm cutting the bottom section, so one end is square and one end has an angle. So I'm able to get 2 sections out of one piece. I had the shop vac hooked up. It's sketching about 3% of the aluminum shavings. So just repeat that process a couple hundred times. Eventually you have all the parts for a greenhouse. Well, some of them anyway. Yeah, like I say, I can set it for all the different angles. I think these are the little foot sections. So once I had everything cut, it was time to start welding it all together. I'm using my TIG welder. It's an old Miller Syncrowave 180 transformer machine, but it works pretty good for stuff this size. Pretty simple. Just have it set to AC, pretty balanced. It's got the water cooler on it, which is nice for welding steady on aluminum like this. I had it set probably to 150 to 170 amps, just about maxed out. I'm welding on top of my wood workbench, but I have some aluminum plates there where I'm welding to protect the surface. The basic process is like this. Just lay the tube up there. Use a hold fast in my bench to hold the tube down on each end. Give it a whack there with the mallet. And I've just got an angle gauge square thing that set to the angle from the CAD model that I will kind of adjust everything to. Once I have it where I want it, give it a little brushy brush on both sides. Just trying to knock off some of that oxide layer, makes it a little easier to weld. I try to weld two sides with it set in this position, once across the top. And then once I get that done, I'll come up on the front edge with a vertical up pass. I'm not a master TIG welder, but it looked okay, especially after doing a few. I kind of got back in the groove. Just flip it over 180 degrees, brush it again, and finish the last two sides. If you're not familiar with TIG welding, I'm just using basically an electric arc to melt the base metal, and then in my left hand is a aluminum filler rod that I'm dipping in to create the weld bead. So that was one section of the arch. I think there's 5 pieces per half of arch. So to finish the arch sections, I had to make these little brackets to weld onto them. These are just sort of gives me something when I get outside to attach the purlins to. So they're actually, I made them out of the same square tube. I just ripped the tube lengthwise on the table saw, create 4 pieces of angle out of each tube. And then just deburred them, drilled a couple holes in them, deburred those holes, set up a little assembly line here because I had to make 60 of these total for the entire greenhouse. And then those purlins I was talking about are these things here. Basically they are, well, the full length of the greenhouse is 24 feet, but I didn't want to have a deal with a 24-foot stick of aluminum, so I split it up into 2 pieces. So I have to weld 5 of these parts end to end in order to make one 12-foot section of tube for the purlin. Then there's 10 24-foot purlins total. And on these, I just welded 3 of the sides because the 4th side is against the plastic polycarbonate covering, so I didn't want a weld sticking up there. So I'm just using a 3rd piece of tube that's just sitting there just as guide as a straight edge to line the pieces on top of it up. So yeah, weld the third side, and then that part is complete, and I stack it aside. I first weld two together, then I take those sections of two and weld those together, and then I welded the fifth piece on to complete the purlin. And once most of the welding was done, we moved outside to start layout. Here I'm just snapping a line down one side to get all the legs in a nice straight line. There are 6 of these hoops total. I showed welding earlier. If you look at them, you can see the little brackets I made welded to the outside. We'll see in a minute how those are used to attach to purlins. And then I have to measure out for the leg spacing, 24 feet. They're going to be 6 feet apart. Did some wind load calculations. I think it's good enough. I know, but it needs to be centered on the centers with everything. Yeah, so these are, being aluminum, they're really light, so this is pretty easy to set them up and screw them down. These little feet I put on there and the big screws, they were pretty self-supporting. And these are the purlins I showed welding earlier. There you just get some self-drilling screws that run in through the bracket into the tube. The first few we measured carefully to make sure all the hoops were evenly spaced and plumb. But once we had these 2 rows on, then it went pretty fast. We were able to add the rest of them. So we'll just show the montage. For the end walls, I thought about making them screw on, but I decided it was going to be easier just to pull them out, pull the last 2 hoops out, and bring it back in the garage, and just weld the end walls to the hoops. So that's what I did, and that's what I'm doing here. And here's what it looked like after we got the first end wall put back in. So at this point we start putting on the polycarbonate. It's the twin wall 8mm. I picked it up at Menards. I shopped around a few other places. A lot of places had similar prices, but with Menards, it was free to have it shipped to the store. And some of the other places wanted as much as $500 to have it shipped to us. So that made them the winning bidder on that one. These strips that go between the sheets proved to be rather difficult We tried it a few different ways. Ended up the best way was to hold the sheet up and then actually shove the strip in from the top between the two sheets instead of trying to fight the sheet into the strip all at once. So now we're coming down the other side. Like I said, these sheets are 10 feet long and 6 feet wide. So they kind of line up with the arch spacing. And the end walls, these are 8 foot long, 6 foot wide sheets. And then I centered one and then split the other in half to do the two sides. Here I am cutting the curve and test fitting it. I used a little battery router, didn't work too bad. Was able to get a pretty tight fit. It was sealed the gap that remained with some silicone. Once we had everything sealed up, we switched to the inside, finish up some of the insulating the floor. We used the 1-inch EPS foam. It's pretty easy to work with. You can just cut it with a knife. Just give it a shallow score. And once it's scored, you can just bend it a little bit and it'll snap right along the line. So this insulation is for the radiant tubes, so that we want to heat the ground on top and not the ground underneath. I bought these little clips to hold the PEX tubing to the insulation. I shouldn't have cheaped out. I should have bought another bag of them. They were a little squirrely. So there's about 30-foot end left of the two hoses that got wrapped in insulation, along with some electrical wires that all got pulled through a piece of mule tape through a piece of 4-inch plastic pipe. That's kind of just serves as a conduit to get the PEX lines from the stove to the greenhouse. And then that whole 4-inch line then got pulled through a 6-inch line that I had buried before we built the foundation. It was a little bit of a struggle, but we were able to get it to pull all the way through. Pretty happy about that. You can see the sun's out today and it heats up pretty fast in there. Once we had the tubes down, we started covering that with some sand and leveled it off and just kind of tamped it down a little bit, and then put some 12-inch concrete pavers on top of that sand. This is mostly just to provide a clean surface to set our plants on.
My favorite feature of the greenhouse is probably the spigot in the greenhouse. It's nice because we just have a hose that is always hooked up, and it makes it really easy to water the flats.
Yeah, before we had it coming in from outside, you had to be careful so at the end of the hose didn't freeze and unhook it every time and all this other stuff, so that should help. So thanks for watching part 2 of our greenhouse build. Our next video on that will probably show some of the details of the heating and cooling setup, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Bye.